We'll carry on now with this idea of the short-run aggregate supply curve, and we'll look at step 3 now. So in the example below, it looks a little complicated. We'll always have the expected or perceived inflation at 3%. And what I will change, however, is the actual or true inflation. That's going to change. That'll be different. So in effect, what we're looking at is people's perception of in effect, their real wage or their nominal wage is going to be wrong because the true inflation is different. Take this situation where the true inflation rate is, say, 6%, but people perceive or believe the inflation rate is only 3%. That's situation A, where, in effect, the nominal wage is not going up as fast enough. The real wage is low or falling, but people are not aware of that. They don't see that. They're making a mistake between their nominal wage and their real wage, and so another way of viewing it is that they undervalue themselves. They could be asking a higher wage. When they receive some kind of a promotion, asked to work overtime, they think it's extra money, when in fact it's not in real terms. Situations like that, we believe that people will work longer hours, and so as a result, the economy will produce more and will be in a situation where above potential. Let's consider a situation like, C, where the actual inflation rate is only 1%. Prices are not changing at all, but people expect or believe that inflation is actually or should be 3%. In this case, the real wage is going to be too high. People will maybe quit their jobs because they think that they're worth more. They'll insist on trying to negotiate a higher salary because they want to have sufficient increase in their income to be able to purchase what they believe is a rise in prices. People may refuse a job because it doesn't pay them enough. In a situation like this, we would say the economy will be below potential. It will be producing less than what it potentially could. People can't believe that they're worth so little. Now, final situation, B, let's call it, where people expect inflation to be 3%, and it actually is 3%. So they're accurately understanding what their situation is, and this is what we mean by a long-run equilibrium, where people understand the price changes accurately. So it's a simplified version, a way of looking at it, but step 3 involves the idea that there are 3 possibilities, situation A, B, and C. I want to look at this idea, though, in a slightly different context to illustrate the same concepts and maybe help you a little bit to understand what I mean by this. A, we refer to it as an inflationary output gap. B is long-run equilibrium, and C is a recessionary gap. Let's consider a student preparing for a test. Now, in each of these cases below, I'm going to say that the actual easiness, the true easiness of a test is always the same. But a student incorrectly predicts how easy the test will be. So imagine, for example, you show up for a test and it turns out to be much easier than you expected. So you thought it's going to be a really tough test. You show up, it turns out to be really simple. So in the case like that, you're going to perform better, your mark will be higher, and you'll get a mark above what you expected to get. Now, imagine, on the other hand, situation C, where you expect the test to be easy, and it turns out to be much more difficult than you expected. You were wrong in that case. Well, in this case, you're going to perform below potential, and your marks are going to be lower. Of course, there's another possibility: is you accurately predict how the test will be, and it's just as easy or hard as you expected it to be, and so you get the mark that you would normally get. This is the same concept of these gaps: an inflationary gap, A, long-run equilibrium, there's no gap, and then a situation of a recessionary gap, C. So now let's look at step 4, and we'll have this idea of output gaps and the adjustment to them. So start with the idea of situation A, for example. We've got an inflationary gap. Keep in mind that the economy at any particular moment can go through one of these 3 gaps. This is a simplification, but it's a good way of looking at it. So, for example, it could happen that the aggregate demand curve goes through point A. Now, keep in mind, aggregate demand is composed of consumption plus investment plus government purchases and net exports. We'll be looking at what drives aggregate demand in subsequent lectures. It could also happen, for example, that the economy goes through point C, which would mean that the economy is in a recession. We call that a recessionary gap. Or finally, we could be at a long-run equilibrium in which the aggregate demand curve goes through point B. this is where the economy would tend over time. Keep in mind that in the example I've got here is that the inflation rate, people expect the inflation rate to be 3%. So, for example, if the actual inflation was 6%, then this curve would have to adjust. Generally speaking, economists believe that the inflationary gap will probably close relatively quickly. The recessionary gap closes more slowly, which means to say that the economy could be stuck in a position like point C for quite some time. What causes these gaps to occur? Well, it occurs because of different fiscal policies or monetary policy, or a variety of shocks, macroeconomic shocks that can push a curve to the left or the right. This is what we're looking at in the future.